Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Connie Young Yu, an author and a descendant of Market Street and Highlandville residents.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Wallace. And to Mayor Ricardo, that was magnificent, a great reading of a resolution. And it was a total resolution. Hearing it all and having you here was like music to my ears, more like a symphony. I'd like to tell you what it means to me personally, but deeply, because my grandfather was a resident of Market Street, Chinatown, and was made refugee by the fire, and my father was born in the new Chinatown of Highlandville. My grandfather, Wong, came to San Jose as an 11-year-old boy named Young Wong to work in Chinatown. His uncle had returned to the village called Longtan, which was Dragon's platform for a sojourn, and was preparing to go back to California, Gumsan Gold Mountain. To the Chinese, it was no longer gold that was the draw, but good wages in Gumsan. Wong begged his mother and father to allow him to go to America. He would work hard and send home his wages. Reluctant, they let him go. His mother rushed to sew work clothes for him. Wong and his uncle sailed from Hong Kong, arriving 6 weeks later in San Francisco, and taking the train over tracks laid by Chinese to one of the largest Chinatowns in California at the time. The Chinatown was known as the Plaza Chinatown because it was so centrally located, as you can see, close to the downtown plaza. There were more than a dozen grocery stores, a fish market, 3 restaurants, merchandising stores, shops with gambling rooms, shops making clothes and shoes, and a large theater where operas were performed by traveling troops. There was a vibrant, bustling place. Coming from a village in southern China to San Jose's biggest Chinatown, Wong was in awe. And the food, it was so abundant. The produce, winter melon, green beans, bok choy, all grown by his kinsmen, and the fruits, he had never seen peaches so large, and he tasted strawberries for the first time. Chinese were indispensable to the gentrified life of San Jose. They were domestic servants, gardeners, laundrymen, cooks. At the age of 12, Wong was a houseboy for a white family who were kindly to him. But working outside of Chinatown had its perils. One time a group of young toughs set upon him throwing rocks. He ran as fast as he could to safety, but what hurt him most was that he lost his hat. In the next few years, Market Street Chinatown was hurting. Harassment of Chinese intensified with more ordinances, more restrictions, and no new workers coming into the valley. In 1885, Chinese were violently expelled from Eureka, and then there was a massacre of dozens of Chinese miners in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And later, Chinese were brutally driven out of Tacoma, Washington in a storm, and their homes and businesses burned. This was followed in Seattle by a massive anti-Chinese riot. The Chinese in San Jose heard horrific accounts from their Seattle kinsfolk who fled to San Francisco. Was it going to happen here? Not if, but when. In the afternoon of May 4th, 1887, as a teenager, Wong was working in the strawberry fields, and he could see the smoke from the fire of Chinatown. By the time he and his friends rushed back to home base, the Chinatown was an inferno, the hottest fire San Jose had ever seen. The Chinese fire brigade tried valiantly to put out the fire. The San Jose firemen fighting the blaze reported there was poor hose, meaning they couldn't get any water. The water tank was usually full, was nearly empty. Now the San Jose newspapers gave vivid reports a day later. The Mercury, the San Jose Daily Herald of May 5th, reported how Chinese were rescuing their possessions, including pets, dogs and cats. This is the quote, "Careful aid being given by the owners of the pets who seemed to be so as solicitous for the safety of these creatures as for their own. Considerable amusement occurred when the Chinese were rescuing their Joss, their statue, from the flames. It took a brave and hard fight to do it, and when they came out panting and singed with soap, they're soaked and scorched and bedraggled God, there was a shout from the spectators. The San Jose Daily Herald announced on May 5th, Chinatown is dead. It is dead forever. But the Chinese would not be driven out because 10 days after the fire, 11 Chinese merchants signed a lease agreement with John Heinlein to build a new Chinatown on his pasture land. Each merchant putting down $300. The city was in furious opposition. The Heinleins and his 2 sons and 2 daughters who carried on his work were harassed and vilified. But they and the Chinese overcame every barrier that the city put up to wipe the Chinatown off the map. In 1888, Chinese had not one Chinatown, but 2. The Woolen Mills Chinatown and Highlandville. Of all places where the Chinese were driven out and their homes torched, San Jose was the only city where the Chinese had a second chance and a Chinatown built for them that would endure. My grandfather returned to San Jose and brought his family to a safe, comfortable community. This fine new Chinatown was protected by an 8-foot-high fence. My father was born in a store in Chinatown, Highlandville, and had the happiest of childhoods. He told me workers came in from all over the valley on the Lunar New Year, Da Ju, Moon Festival, and gave him lots of red envelopes. Highlandville carried on the same wonderful traditions as in the Market Street Chinatown. After 44 years, though, the longest of any of the Chinatowns in San Jose, Highlandville ended during the Depression, defeated finally by the Chinese exclusion law. But a generation of children grew up in the Chinatown as Americans. That's how I'm here. My father, John C. Young, became a community leader in San Francisco, founder of the Chinese New Year Parade, where he got his ideas from Highlandville, and was colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. When people asked him, where did you come from? Where are you from, really? He'd answer proudly, San Jose, born and bred. Where's the Chinatown legacy now? There's a plaque in front of the Fairmont placed there by Asian Americans for Community Involvement and the Association of Ethnic Chinese on the 100th anniversary of the burning of the Market Street Chinatown. The remains of the Market Street Chinatown are not lost or buried. They were brought by CHCP, led by William Wong and to Professor Barbara Voss and the archaeology department of Stanford University. They continue to study and learn from the burned artifacts. The heat of the fire has been determined that it could only be arson. In the near future, you can visit San Jose's newest park called Highlandville Park. It is inside the development that's in progress, the development that you can see in progress, called 6th and Jackson Street, the site of Highlandville Chinatown, which is now Japantown. John Heinlein also leased land to the Japanese, and Filipinos also came here later. So it became an Asian American community. Japantown now is a vibrant, multicultural neighborhood of San Jose, open to everybody and welcoming everyone. At Highlandville Park, there will be a children's playground, a sculpture that symbolizes the struggles and triumphs of the people who live there, and a history pathway. I imagine that the Chinatown Market Street fire will be the first stepping stone. As out of the ashes rose a new community that would not be driven out. It was an end, but a beginning. On behalf of those who fought the good fight and continue to do so, I'd like to say to the city of San Jose, apology accepted and resolution embraced. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure now to introduce Gerrye Wong. She is the co-founder of the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm so proud to be here at this wonderful occasion because my heart is just bursting with happiness that at long last, our great city of San Jose is recognizing and acknowledging the too oftentimes sad treatment that was flung on the Chinese for too many years since they first came here in 1866. Think of that. It's been 155 years since Chinese pioneers first came to San Jose seeking new and better lives for their families and themselves. The people struggled against a very non-welcoming environment. The worst being the time when their largest Chinatown of 1,400 people was publicly banned by the city mayor and city council and ultimately burned to the ground. Now, I grew up in San Jose, and in the 1940s, I lived right down there in downtown 2nd Street in an old Victorian house that is now proclaimed a historic landmark. That distinction is not because I live there. I may look it, but I'm not that old. Seriously, I want to explain discrimination felt by the Chinese even at the time I was growing up. My family, like other Chinese, were not welcome to buy property here during World War II days when China was actually America's ally. Think about that. My father was managing the second largest department store in downtown San Jose, but yet he and his Chinese employees were not allowed to purchase a place near their work. When I tell my grandson Braden in the front row here, this unjust treatment was happening as recently as 70 years ago, it's hard for he and members of his generation to grasp the discrimination practices that even I felt. So I've often been asked, how did I, a fourth-generation Chinese American, get involved in my passion of preserving Chinese history? So let me tell you that way back in the mid-1940s when I was growing up in San Jose, as Connie said, the longest-lasting Chinatown, Highlandville, was gone. But the Untitled Temple, which was being threatened at that time, was still there, ready for demolition by the city. My father was a spokesman who went before the then San Jose City Council pleading to save the historic building, and he won a short reprieve of 3 years. But sadly, during that time, we moved away, and with no other spokesman coming forward, the city destroyed the building. The last standing remnant of the San Jose Chinatown in 1950. Obviously, my father was very sad. He had failed in his job. But in 1986, a group of concerned Chinese citizens, upon learning of the discovery of artifacts found under this very same location here at the Market Street Chinatown, decided it was time to remember those strugglers. And I helped with many of my cohorts here to co-found the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project exactly 100 years after the fire. Yes, they all should take a bow, every one of them. Our goal was to establish a museum to preserve and present the Chinese history of San Jose, and our shining moment came in 1991 when we gloriously cut the ribbons and presented a replica of the Untitled Temple building to the city of San Jose as a token of ongoing friendship towards a new future of happier times. I sometimes think that maybe my dad up there was guiding my destiny to get that building rebuilt. And let me brag for all of my CHCP cohorts. Where are you? Raise your hand, all you CHCP people. Let me brag for all of them. That building stands proudly, welcoming over 1,000 children annually for the last few years because the CHCP funded field trips for schools in underserved communities in San Jose. And they came to visit the Museum of Chinese American History that is located still in San Jose's History Park. So my heart is just pounding. Where's my doctor? Just telling you about my dad's and my legacy, because I have a secret to tell you. He never told me about his role in trying to save the building. Until I told him 35 years later I was working to rebuild the replica. And only then did he tell me how sad and devastated he felt when it was demolished. So is that deja vu or what is it? I don't know. But on this 30th anniversary of our partnership with the city and opening of our museum doors, which was attended by then San Jose mayors Tom McHenry and Susan Hammer, I stand proudly beside our mayor today, Sam Liccardo, thanking our city council members for taking this long-awaited step towards reconciliation by this resolution of apology of a sad history of wrongdoings perpetuated against the Chinese citizens of the past. So on behalf of all of you, the Chinese American community of today, I thank you with a heart still beating, it's bursting this time, but with pride of all the communities that are joining together today with all of you in the spirit of friendship and reconciliation in a world of no more anti-Asian hate.
Thank you very much, Gerrye.